Hey guys, JKman99 here, and welcome to my Lost videos. Yes, I promised this maybe 15 years ago that we were going to start doing videos about Lost on this channel, and it took me a long time to get here, but we are finally here, marking the 20-year anniversary of Lost. We're going to basically do a little celebration in the year 2025, which I realize is technically the 21st year, but you know, it's within the first season. 20 years ago was the first season, and followed by season 2, obviously. So what we're going to do is, during the month of January of 2025 and throughout the year of 2025, we're going to do 12, I was about to total 12 fingers, you can't do that, 12 videos once a month about Lost. And the first 6 months are going to be basically top 10 videos, and in the second 6 months we're going to do kind of a fan fiction, kind of my version of Lost, what I thought the show should have done that it didn't do, and sort of a slight retelling. And we all have our own version of that, like, oh, I wish they would have done this, I wish they would have done that. So in that version, I just tell you what I think they should have done in lieu of what they actually did do. A lot of it's extremely similar, and you'll see what that is when we get to it. But for this video, this is about the best episodes of Lost. Now, I could have done a top 10 best episodes of Lost, but as we all know, Lost is known for the numbers. They're known for 4, 8, 15, 16, 23, 42. So I didn't think it was really fair to throw a 10 in there. You know, there's really no 10. So I figured I'd use the numbers to do my top 10 lists, and every time I do a top 10 list, I substitute a number in for that list. So in this case, since best episodes are good, we're going to do the top 16 best episodes of Lost. Number 16, Outlaws. Now, I know that this episode isn't ranked the highest on many people's lists, but going back and watching the entire series, Outlaws fits together a lot more than people think with the entire show. It's a lot more than Sawyer just chasing a boar around. First off, this episode connects with Sawyer's demons. It explains his current state of mind and his guilt for killing the wrong man, and how it eventually comes back around and ultimately brings him to the island itself. This is also the episode where Sawyer's connection with Christian is revealed, and it's revealed that Christian influenced Sawyer to follow through with the murder. This whole episode revolves around the revenge question, and whether or not getting back at someone won't come back to haunt you. There are also good subplots in the episode, with Jack wanting the guns, Locke and Sawyer have one of their first scenes together, Charlie is dealing with murder, and there's actually really interesting lighting on that burial, by the way, if you go back and look at it. And there are a lot of character development and insights between Kate and Sawyer during their drinking game. And finally, this episode is the first real clue as to what the Whispers are. The whole it'll come back around thing is heard on the island, and then we learn in season 6 that the Whispers are the ones that haven't moved on. So it shows that there was a plan for the Whispers all along, apparently. I don't know about that, honestly, but after watching the entire series, I definitely recommend watching this episode again, because you might see it differently given what you know about the entire show. Number 15, LaFleur. This is just a great feel-good episode. Sawyer is back to form, establishing himself as the leader and helping his friends when they go into Dharmaville. I really liked the parallels between 1977 and 1974, and seeing Sawyer as an honest working man, while in the other flashback, he's being dishonest and doing his con artist thing. It was just a great way to see the dynamics. When Juliet delivered the baby, I actually thought Sawyer and Juliet were going to kiss like right then and there afterwards, but they didn't. They saved that for the end of the episode. Of course, establishing Juliet and Sawyer together and happy is what really makes this episode great. The only thing I wish they would have done later in the series is established the Jin and Miles friendship, or the Miles and Juliet friendship, or even the Jin and Juliet friendship. I mean, does Jin and Juliet even talk to each other after this episode in the remainder of the entire series? I know that, like, Sawyer was the glue in this episode, but like you would assume that the others would have had some sort of relationships as the years had progressed with them all on the island together. But once the original survivors come back, those relationships are like completely broken down, and it's just all about their old relationships. That's the only part I thought that the overall show did wrong here. Just watching Sawyer back in action at this point in the show running was great, and it was great to see the happy ending for both Sawyer and Juliet. And also, the episode ends with Lost cutting the Sawyer Kate theme right when they see each other, so you have to wait one more week to see how that goes down, and I just thought that was pretty cool. Number 14, Dead is Dead. Okay, this episode I definitely love, but I've been very flip-floppy on how well I love it. Alright, let me explain. This episode is really about the flashback, in my opinion. This episode shows Ben growing up with the others, becoming the leader, and it also shows Whitmore as an other. I think I was hoping for an explanation of the rules and why Whitmore changed them. Those answers never came, but when I look at the episode now, it's a lot better. They made it all about Alex, what finally broke Ben Linus. He came back to the island to be judged. You know, I don't really believe that still. Ben came for power, but Locke wouldn't leave him alone, and Ben freaked out. Over and over again, Locke kept winning arguments with Ben, and Ben did not know anything about the survivors being in Dharmaville. Locke knew all the answers, and Ben got to see how life was on the other side. The smoke monster Ben scene was great, especially because at this point, Jacob was all but forgotten. The Ben and Smokey were basically the two main island characters. Nobody even cared about Jacob at that point anymore. Yeah, it didn't have as many answers as I wanted, but when you look at the flashback and combine it with the storyline about Alex, it's an overall great episode. Number 13, Ab Interno. Okay, I honestly don't know how to pronounce that. This was highly acclaimed by critics and myself. It really shows the true reality of Jacob and the smoke monster, and it defines what the island is. This episode has the statue, the black rock, and the backstory of Richard that was shot really well, and it was shot so well it actually made me think I wasn't watching Lost a few times. And what I mean by that is it really seemed like it was a different show when they were showing all that stuff from the 1800s. The conversation between Jacob and Richard illustrate what has been going on the island for 2,000 years. And I also really like the campfire scene with Team Jacob at the beginning, just casually talking about Richard like they were. It was just fun seeing that group of characters sitting around the campfire like that. The whole island is hell theory was also presented very well, which distracts from the real answers that are provided in the episode. For one, we know that the smoke monster has to kill the candidates, but yet a few episodes later, we are still questioning if the smoke monster is a good guy or a bad guy. The only reason I don't have this episode much higher on my list is that in the show, we basically learned that Richard was just not as important as we thought he was, so therefore this kind of brings the episode down a little bit, like as opposed to making it like a top 5 overall episode. But if it wasn't for that, this would be a top 5 overall episode. It was shot great, it was acted great, it provided a lot of answers, and overall it was a great episode. Number 12, The Long Con. So after a great episode with Hunting Party and a letdown from Fire and Water, we needed another good one, and Long Con delivered. This was another episode I added to my list after watching the entire series again. First off, it's a return of Sawyer kind of being a jerk. Jack goes through his meds, Sawyer threatens him, Jack laughs it off, and by the end, Sawyer's basically back to being the hated guy on the island again. Later on, after Sun's attack, we get to see a really great huddle scene with Jack, Kate, Ana Lucia, Locke, and Sawyer, basically establishing themselves as the leaders of the group. Sawyer pins Locke against Jack, and it turns out that Sawyer is the one behind everything. Sawyer had been disrespected as almost comic relief up to that point, and stealing the guns made people remember and hate him. It was brilliantly done because it actually tricks the audience into not suspecting Sawyer at the end, so you're kind of along for the ride when he tricks everyone on the island as well. Kate brilliantly also points out that Sawyer just wants to be hated, still feeling guilty for murdering an innocent man, which brings us back to what happened in Outlaws. The real reason I put this on the list, though, is because this episode is huge for the Lost Story arc. The entire show really was a long con. Get the smoke monster to turn off the light and think it was his idea so Smokey could then get killed? Pretty big long con there by Jacob in the end. Also, Sawyer has Charlie attack Sun, and then Jin never finds out about it, which is just kind of a interesting footnote here to that episode. All right, so let's actually talk about the hunting party here at number 11. Number 11, the hunting party. This is an episode I don't understand why others don't like it as much. First off, it is the first real dialogue between the main cast and the others, specifically Tom Friendly. There isn't too much Jack, Locke, and Sawyer team-ups, and this is an episode that has a Jack, Locke, and Sawyer team-up. I mean, Sawyer calls Locke Mr. Clean. What more do you guys want? With all the fighting they do, it's great just to watch them team up and put all their differences aside for an episode, while still kind of talking about their differences while they're putting them aside. I think a lot of people forget that the flashback was really good as well. Like, this was a really good Jack flashback. Jack being tempted by a woman all episode, and then he kisses her, and then on top of that, is man enough to confess it to Sarah. So you think that that's what causes his divorce, but then it turns out that Sarah was going to leave him anyway, and you just don't see that coming, and it's a very powerful insight into Jack's character. And so overall, I really like this episode, and I think everybody should give it a second look because it's definitely one of the best episodes of the series. Number 10, Exodus, Part 1. Yes, only Part 1, not Part 2. Because Part 1 had it all. Danielle, the smoke monster, a great scene between Jack and Sawyer, a wonderfully put together raft launching scene, and overall great flashbacks and a direct story. Like, the flashbacks are varied in this one. You get to see a little bit from everybody, and the story is very direct of what they need to do. Between Exodus 1 and Exodus 2, the best flashbacks were in episode 1, in my opinion, or Exodus 1. On Island, this was a great let's work together episode. Up until that point, there was obviously plenty of issues on the island, but there weren't too many episodes where the entire cast had to work together. I mean, Jack had just been after Locke 2 episodes ago, and now they're working together here. The fact that they were able to put their differences aside and work together was just great to see. The best part of the episode by far was the acting. Don't try to tell me you did not feel the emotions in this episode. I personally never not get emotional watching this episode. And when I saw this episode, I thought this was the season finale, and it would have been a great one at that. When the raft goes in the ocean, I'm like, oh, I can't wait till next season. And then I found out there was still one more episode left, which was just great at that point. This is actually the episode that got me watching the show in the first place. This was the third episode I had ever watched. I turned it on, and I was like, oh my God, this show is so great. I can't wait till next season. And then I got to learn that there was more coming. So it was a great way to get introduced to the show of Lost. So let's talk about Exodus 2 real quick. It's not that Exodus 2 was bad or anything like that. A matter of fact, most people, I think it's better than Exodus 1. But it was just that Exodus 1 had those great scenes and acting, and it was direct to the point, and it got me to start watching the show. So I think for me, I just have a more personal love for Exodus 1 than the average person does. Number 9, Dr. Linus. Okay, so first off, the parallels between the two Bens are brilliant. Michael Emerson really convinces you he's two different people, but also the same guy. There is more to this episode than just the Ben story, and we'll get to that in a bit. We all knew that Ben killing Jacob would catch up to him. Ben is completely lost in this episode. No friends, no power, he's screwed. The shared laugh he had with Lapidus was like the only good thing that happened to him, and then like he gets marched to his own grave right after it happens. In both storylines, Ben makes the right choice. He didn't ruin Alex's life in the Sideways episode, and on the island he sincerely apologized to Alana and is actually forgiven by her. Ben becomes a good character, which is really telling given all the bad things he's done. Not only is the Ben storyline good, but even the subplot was great. The whole Jack, Hurley, and Richard going to the Black Rock. Jack basically gives Richard a reason to live, and then they all go back to the beach where all of Team Jacob is united at that point. And there was just something I really liked about that united scene. Like, I remember, like, we've seen so many of those where they all just kind of meet up on the beach and stuff, and it was just interesting to watch, like, Jack hug Son after the crazy time traveling adventure. And just the subtleties of the rest of the group meeting each other, and then you see Ben and Richard on the outside of the huddle, like they're just outsiders now after basically being insiders all their time on the island. I just love this whole teaming up thing, bringing different characters together and having them team up. And then at the end, Whitmore showing up out of nowhere. I just thought that was really brilliant. Number 8, The Life and Death of Jeremy Bentham. Epic failure equals John Locke. Man, this guy never wins, even in the end. For seasons 3 and 4, Locke's visits were discussed, and now we finally see them. They've been hinted at. Like, what I mean by Locke's visits, I mean him as Jeremy Bentham off island. They talked about it at the end of season 3. They talked about it during season 4. But you never see what Locke did when he came off the island, and now you finally get a chance to see what happens. There were some obvious plot holes with what they said he did versus what you see him actually do, but I still think the episode delivers. Locke leaves the island, and Whitmore ironically saves him. Locke decides to trust Whitmore. Granted, at this point, Whitmore has met Jacob and gotten those instructions, but I still don't think Whitmore has John's best interest at heart. Locke, of course, then fails miserably. Saeed, Kate, Hurley, they all say no to him. He didn't even ask Walt when he was there. But as we know from the new man in charge, Walt becomes the new Jacob, so Locke could have just gotten Walt to come back then, but whatever. Does Locke get Jack to be interested in the island? Yes, he does. And then Locke dies. He fulfilled his purpose in life. That seemed to be his entire purpose. Just get Jack to be interested in what Locke was interested in. And then Locke does not matter anymore. That's just so sad that that's how his story ends. It's really not fulfilled that much in the Flash Sideways they do. Ironically, though, the Man in Black is the one that gets Jack interested in the island in the first place, masquerading as Christian. And then Jack's the one who foils the Man in Black's plan. So it's kind of an irony there. Locke is murdered, and that's it for him. It's a really sad life. Number 7, The Brig. This is a truly great episode that ties together a lot of loose ends. At this time, this is one of the first all-island episodes. The flashback was on island, and then the main storyline was also on island. This episode shows that Locke is once again being used by Ben. Ben just wanted to get better. He was hurt. He promised Locke all the secrets. Locke went along with it and was thrown away at the end as if he was garbage after Ben was all healed up. However, this time, for the first time, Locke says enough. With the help of Richard, he practically cons Sawyer to the Black Rock and connects the fact that Locke's father was the con man that ruined Sawyer's life. And just seeing Sawyer being able to get revenge on Cooper was great. And for the first time, Sawyer is allowed to live life. And I think he actually owes that to the island. And he never says it directly, but he kind of lives that way, given how he stays in Dharmaville for 3 years. And he's essentially James Ford after that. And he isn't quite sure how to handle it, really. And Locke, for one of the only times on the show, is about to get the upper hand. And we see that in our next episode on this list. Number 6, The Man Behind the Curtain. This was, and still is, in my heart, the number 1 episode in all of Lost. I will explain later why I have it listed at number 6, though. Okay, so Locke carries the body into the camp and says to them, I did what you asked, give me what I want. And basically Locke actually has Ben now, and yet Ben is still kind of playing games with him. This episode has an answer flashback. It tells you what Ben and Dharma really are, and doesn't come back to the actual truth of this until season 5. Ben is a Dharma boy that helps out in a genocide that maybe was Whitmore's choice. They kind of imply it is, but maybe it was actually Ben's. You never really know. You have to kind of trust Ben on that one. And then after that, he becomes the leader of the others. We also see that Richard doesn't age for the first time. What really drives this episode is Ben losing his power to Locke, losing support from the rest of the others, and then we're finally talking about Jacob. At this point, everyone wanted to know who Jacob was, and we finally get to go to the cabin and possibly meet him. We also see the powder at this point in the show, and that kind of gives us a hint for things to come later on. Then we once again see that Locke is special because he heard Jacob, whereas Ben didn't. And of course, what Locke should have done is just kept his mouth shut. But of course, he had to go and tell Ben that he was going to expose him. He should have just exposed him. And the sad thing is, even though this episode shows that Locke and Ben are special, neither one of them knows what they are doing the whole time. Ben doesn't have the secrets, and Locke just got himself shot. Locke was going to expose Ben, but seriously, expose what? What was he possibly going to say that he could prove? So why don't I put this one at number 1, like I really want to? I had this episode as my favorite episode for a long time. Truly, because the show did not stick with the direction of this episode. The cabin is still very unknown, and it seems that it was basically just abandoned as a storyline in season 5. When Jacob's bodyguards showed up on the island, they literally burned down the cabin. They literally say, nope, we're not going in this direction. But why did you have the cabin as a thing for 2 seasons if you weren't going to do anything with it? It bugs me. Anyway, so that's part of the reason I don't put this as number 1 anymore. You can kind of go back and see that at some point, like while this was happening, the cabin was used to trap the man in black because they had or keep the man in black out because they had the powder going around the cabin. We find out later, though, that Ben made it all up, but yet the smoke monster was in the cabin when all the stuff was moving around. I mean, that's quite a coincidence if you're making something up. And the fact that the show just dismissed the cabin scene, like at the end of season 5, was kind of a big middle finger to fans who were trying to figure out what the heck was going on in that scene. The truth was, what they decided to do with Jacob just didn't match what happened in the cabin. So it was the one part of the show for me that just darted in a completely different direction from what they were trying to establish. And that was highly unfortunate, but at the same time, I love this episode, but the fact that there was basically rewrites that kind of undermined it later on makes it so this episode isn't as good when you look at the overall show. Number 5, The Constant. I know what you guys are already thinking. Why isn't this one number 1? Almost every review of Lost has this as the most perfect episode. And while I do like the episode a lot, it also suffers from what the man behind the curtain does. It eventually deviates from what was being established in this episode, and I'll try to explain it. Let's take a look at the time travel. We had Charlotte and the rest of the crew on the freighter have the similar time travel issues that Desmond has, but yet, and you can kind of say that was similar to the time travel he has in season 3 when he flips the switch in the hatch. But the problem is then in season 5, there's actual time traveling where the bodies themselves moves through time and not the minds, like what is happening with Desmond, where he's the only one that quantum leaps. And that's kind of what screws it up. If they would have kept just quantum leap time travel the whole time, then I think you're on to something. But the fact that they decided to retcon it and have real time travel in season 5 kind of ruins what happens here. And it also does the whole whatever happened thing, brings that into the situation as well. But let's talk about what's good with the episode. The Desmond Penny reunite scene was beyond amazing, and how the story was built to it was great. Having Daniel help out Desmond too was good. I guess my thing with the episode also comes down to expectations. As much as I loved the Desmond and Penny scene, and as much as it's the scene that everyone loves, I did not want Desmond and Penny to reunite until season 6, because we all knew if they did, Desmond would not be as much a part of the show. And then, by the end of season 4, they were united. And then after that, Desmond wasn't heard from much until the end of the series. He's barely in season 5, he's barely in season 6. They had no idea what to do with Desmond after they reunited him with Penny. Now, they obviously don't unite in this episode, of course, but Desmond losing his ability to see the future does go away. That's why he says he's perfect now, and I do like how they did that. The episode really does take away from Desmond being a more active part of the show. And at the time of the show, This episode didn't really move the freighter story along much. You're still kind of wondering what's going on there. And then they were on the boat, and it doesn't move the freighter story along a lot. Okay, it may sound like I'm criticizing a great episode, and the truth is, I do think it's great. It has a strong emotional scene and a great build-up to get to it, and great sci-fi accuracy with the time travel when you looked at it before they changed it. And overall, it's just a very powerful episode and a great hour of television just from the acting. And I definitely respect that part of it, which is why it's so high on my list, being here at number 5. Number 4, Walkabout. This episode is flawless with the exception of the boar hunting. I'm actually being serious. The first minute of Lost I ever saw was Locke, Kate, and Michael hunting, and it made me actually turn off the show to find something else to watch. It honestly seems like Survivor, so I just didn't want to watch it. This episode was the survivors, though, still surviving, fighting over everything, and the mysterious Locke, who hadn't done much until then, says he will go for a hunt. He goes out, finds the boar, faces down the smoke monster, and brings the boar back all on his own. But who is Locke? It's hard to realize that even though Locke is seen as the badass for most of season 1, his true nature is still actually revealed in episode 4. We all wanted to know what was Locke's secret after he said he had a secret in the first episode. Locke is no crazy general, he's just a boring cubicle worker. He has a girlfriend that's a call girl, and then his big reveal is that he's unable to walk, and he can't accept it. And let's face it, most of us wouldn't be able to accept it either. On the island, though, he can walk, and that's the big secret. Him getting up on the island after he learns he could walk is such an emotional scene that's perfectly well done, and it just, it gets you. It just, there's something about that scene that gets you. And the funny thing is that Locke's true nature is eventually explored in further seasons, but that first season, he just seems like such a badass the whole time, but it's so interesting that they already give you a peek behind the curtain in episode 4, but yet you don't really think about that as the episodes progress. They only drop back to it every once in a while that he wasn't able to walk or that he worked at a box company. Very, very little mentioning of that. So it's a really cool way that the show decided to do that. So that by the time we got to season 2, Locke becoming pathetic was really no surprise, and it was already well established. Number 3, The Man from Tallahassee. This episode did 2 great things all in one episode. 1, we wanted to know what was that town on the island ever since the beginning of the season. We knew that the others lived in the houses, and we wanted to go there. And after 13 episodes, we were finally there. So that one thing made this episode great regardless. The second thing is that we got to finally learn why John Locke was in a wheelchair. Also, we get to see the side of Jack we don't want to see. Him broken down and trusting the others. He just wants to get away from his broken heart that Kate had broken. Just seeing the others' world from characters we now know, plus Richard, plus the dialogue between Ben and Locke is great, since both characters are equally so greatly pathetic in reality, both trying to one-up the other. And yet, Ben is still in control here. He doesn't lose control until Dead is Dead. I mean, this episode got Terry O'Quinn an Emmy. I mean, what more can you say? The whole magic box, the whole magic box thing made it seem like this episode would lead to more answers, but the thing was, Ben had none, and the story arcs later on proved that. But it all really started here, and just overall, just those 2 big things, answering the question about why John Locke was in a wheelchair, and just seeing how the others were operated under Ben in what we now know as Dharmaville, was just a great thing to see in one episode. Number 2, The Shape of Things to Come. Awesome episode, no complaints. Everything about this episode is brilliant. You see Ben kind of appear in a desert. How? Who knows? Awesome. He gets into badass mode, shows us he can pretty much do whatever he wants. He is ready to live off the island, and he does so very well. Ben turning Saeed was just great. And on island, he means business. Ben's not playing games anymore. He gets right down to it. He's playing the role of a prisoner until the whole 14J thing. Then it's revealed that Ben had a gun and was fine the entire time he was pretending to basically be a prisoner, but now the games are pretty much over. The missionaries are on their way. They kill almost everyone who was there. The island clearly didn't let Sawyer die, because he would have totally died with all those bullets going through that see-through fence, basically. And then we get to the house, and then the Ben Keeney showdown begins, and words can't describe how great this scene is. So Keamy brings out Alex, and now admittedly we don't know if Keamy will kill everybody after getting Linus, but we now know that one of the secondary protocol wasn't in play yet, so he would have been able to get Ben, and everyone else would have pretty much been safe. But regardless, when we see Alex, we really don't expect her to die. We expect something to happen that allows her to live, but no, she's dead. And I mean so suddenly, the way they did that countdown, no one believes it. And then, of course, Ben says Whitmore changed the rules. Now, as a show, not this episode, Dead is Dead had a great opportunity to go into those rules more and didn't. And we already talked about that. We now know that Alex shouldn't have died, according to Ben. It came down to a discussion between Ben and Whitmore in Dead and Dead. If Alex was important enough, the island wouldn't let her die. Ben thought it was wrong to kill a baby, but the island didn't care about Danielle and Alex. So I think that's what Alex's death signifies on the show in general, that like Whitmore was right the whole time, and that the island didn't care about Alex. Then in his grief, the smoke monster arrives and kills the missionaries. They show how Ben has a little bit of control over the smoke monster, which you have no sign of that before this episode, so just including that here was great. Ben, Locke, and Hurley are off to see Jacob at the end. It's crazy that the episode started with a board game and ended with Locke and Sawyer with guns on each other at the end. And then, of course, the Ben Whitmore scene at the very end in the penthouse. Again, the actual rules would have been great to know, so I guess I do have a tiny complaint, but not in this episode. I expected it to happen later. Now, they do imply later that the whole, like, can't hurt each other thing was the rule, but, I mean, come on, they could have done a little bit better than that. But at this point, the war is on, and Ben in brilliant mode can never be beat. Number 1, all the best cowboys have daddy issues. So let me start off by saying I'm probably the only person I know that has this as the number 1 episode in all of Lost. So I want to do as much as I can to explain why this is the number 1 episode. This is a simple episode, but it drives the meaning and purpose of the main character and the show. In this case, the main character being Jack. Claire is kidnapped, and despite the differences in the drama of all the survivors, everyone drops what they're doing to help look for Claire. So that alone was just kind of a work together thing that I liked at the beginning of this episode. This episode also starts the Jack versus Locke story arc that we hadn't really seen up until this point. And it also further goes into Jack's inability to let go. But we also get to see how Jack's inability to let go saves Charlie's life, just as it saves the island itself in the end. We learn a lot about all the main characters just from simple dialogue, and every character has something good to say in this episode. Even the Walt Sawyer conversation was really brilliant. The flashback story is even better. We learn about how Jack's inability to let go kills his father and sets everything into motion, which sends Christian to Australia, who sends Jack to Australia to get him, which sends Jack to the island, and has Smokey Christian manipulate Jack back to the island, to which Jack dies, and then finally, after he dies, he reunites with his father at the end. This episode has everlasting consequences for the rest of the series, for Jack and his father, and Jack versus Locke. There's just so many things I can go into in this episode that's just hard to say in words. Like, I love just the Jack and Kate going back and forth while they're looking for Claire. I even love Boone and Locke going back and forth while they're looking for Claire. They actually find the hatch in this episode, which is something pretty big for the show itself. Everybody talking back at the caves and back at the beach, I thought was brilliant dialogue. Like, Saeed and Sawyer have a conversation as well. There's just so much. I could keep going and going. I really wish more people would like this episode, and I really think everybody should go back and give it another look, because it really, I think, in one episode pretty much shows you like what this show is about. It's about Jack trying to reunite with his father, and basically it's that journey. This is a perfect episode that I can't see anything wrong with, and it's a great number 1 episode for the show of Lost. Alright guys, that concludes this first video. Thank you so much for watching and tuning in. Next month we are going to do, since we just did the best episodes, we'll do the least best episodes. Some might want to call them the worst episodes. I don't like that. I'll tell you why next month. But yeah, we'll be doing that next month. So thank you so much for tuning into this one, and take care.